Yeah, yeah.
We are the epitome of Black female love.
It's easy for us as Black women to hold up the banner and the calls for everyone else. But again, who holds up the banner and the calls for us? What role does the church play in all of this stuff?
Is that we as a Black church are perpetuating the same behavior as a patriarchal evangelicals have been doing.
Right. And guess
church, but it's the sisters in the congregation.
But it's a lot of times it is the Black women who bring us down more, or push or try to silence our voices more in the Black church.
Hold on.
Oh, wow, ladies. Hello, and hello. Those of you part of our viewing audience, please put it in the chat. Let us know that you are listening with us on today. Tell us what city you are coming from. We're so happy that you all are here with us. So just put in the chat, let us know that you're here. Ladies, my goodness, it has been a while. Who wants to do the catch up first? Oh my goodness.
Oh, everybody's looking at me. Okay, I'll do the catch up first. Hello, everybody. How are you? It is wonderful to know that you're checking in, signing in, all that good stuff. We are glad to have you. Glad to be back with my sisters. My sisters all have a very full plate, and sometimes we just have to brush by each other, but it's a blessing to be here. So much is going on. I've had graduations, 2 grandchildren graduations. Let's see. I then had a graduation. I just came in from Chicago, had a graduation there. So I'm excited to see young people doing things and going places, and just talking with a lot of the graduates, asking them, so what are you going to do when you after the summer? What's your plans? I'm going to go to college. I'm going to take up law. I'm going to take up radiology. I'm going to take up this. One of my granddaughters got her master's in journalism. And so this girl never talked. And all of a sudden she got a voice, a real voice. And she's still talking. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Wow, congratulations on that with your family. And I absolutely love the post that you put up about you and your husband. I thought that was just the most transparent, real, honest, loving thing. So absolutely wonderful.
Oh,
okay. Wallace, what about you?
Well, I'm doing much better. I thanks and praise the Lord. I thank you all for your prayers and covering me. I have enjoyed Belize for a few days. I was able to breathe and be on the water, and I just loved it. So what's going on? That's the only thing I think that's going on with me. My granddaughters got awards, and they're moving from middle school to high school. So, I was in this predominantly white school. I was so happy to see the math, highest math scores for their grade. And, I was just tickled pink. That's all I can say. Yeah. All is well.
Dr. Bradford, did you notice how she got that in? Tickle pink. She was did you notice how she threw that in?
I couldn't even hear it. Sometimes I can't hear those particular colors. But
I think they call that selective amnesia.
Well, I call it what you will. It was red and white that made them pink. So, how you doing?
Well, I am good. It seems like I have been on and off planes for the last month, trying to catch up. And there have been a couple of nights, when you travel so much, a couple of nights, and Dr. Bradford, this, that you wake up and in the middle of the night, and you're going, wait a minute, where am I?
Exactly.
And trying to figure out, wow, okay. But it's been good. Life has been good. My first, well, we can say my first year of the semester closed out here at Georgetown, and so yeah, right. And so that part has been really great. A lot of the graduate students in the building where I am have graduated, and this week has been really good running into them. Those who finished, put in that PhD work, they got it done, graduated the master's level, and so it's just been rewarding to hear the conversations that they have and to hear their next steps and to be around these group of folk who are excited about life, young but not sure about life. And so all of that with travel and just personal life is like, oh, so it's been good.
Dr. Burns, I need to put in another plug if it's okay.
Yes.
Friendship Press just let me know that they are going to publish my dissertation. So I just got my EDD, and I was told it had global implications. So I forgot about that. I just need to let you know.
Wait a minute. Y'all speaking to me backstage. You is small. You is pretty.
You is important.
Y'all need to stop. Y'all need to stop.
Like you.
Congratulations!
Oh
my
God!
God!
I was young enough to do a PhD, but I'm past that. I will see that in heaven.
Hallelujah.
Congratulations! So Bradford, what about you? What about you, Bradford? What about you?
Oh,
this last month?
I don't buy me. I tell you. When I tell you, as you know, it seems since January I've been on the road every week, and my goodness, Ishando, I'm so grateful and humbled by the opportunities. But guess what? Next week, next couple of weeks,
oh yeah,
going to be on vacation with my husband.
Wow!
All right. Nothing wrong with that.
And I'm so ready. I'm so ready to unplug. Well, I'm not taking any computers with me. Yes. Period. So yes, I'm excited.
Oh wow! Wow to hear, Dr. Bradford. You know, you always connected. You're always the one answering the calls, doing the next, and so to kind of hear you say, you know what, I'm going to unplug. I applaud you. That is absolutely wonderful. Always taking care of others, and so congratulations to you. And that, wow. Well, let's see. Before we bring our guest up from backstage, there's a whole lot that's happened in the country, you know, since we had our last broadcast. Number, 45. If there was a way we could take a number out of an American code.
It's been indicted, getting ready to get some more some more.
Wow. But a whole lot has happened. And
so what? You know, we keep hearing all these indictments and we keep hearing all these charges. So, and
he's still
not going to put that in the atmosphere. We want him to pay for the crimes committed.
Absolutely.
Well, and then
denied.
Right. But this is the thing. So right now he's leading in his party. Might be you all's party, some of you all who are listening. But I tell you, the greater terror to me now is that man in Florida.
Yeah. What we gonna call him, Mr. D, or what? What's the handle?
I don't know, but a person who stays up through the night to sign new laws and put them in place. There, if there was definition for demonic, that just has to be around there somewhere.
Name start with D.
The Satan, is that what his name is? The Satan. Okay.
Yeah, but and as you all know, that I've had a lot of travel back and forth between Florida and having been there in May, that one of the things and talking with educators that are there as well, but the number of individuals who are of Latin descent or Hispanic that made the decision in the top of May to begin their migration out of the state so they would not be caught in the state when June 1 came. Right.
Wow.
And so we look at that. And then, as you said, Dr. Wright, that we also have the issue of a Black woman, Black mother who was killed, just by knocking on a door and killed through the door. But we have a state that deals with stand your ground, that is permitless carry now, just all of these kind of wonderful things. And y'all.
I mean, that's insane, especially when she was only trying to do the diplomatic thing, is going over to have a discussion with her neighbor about what happened. It's very disappointing.
Excuse me.
Mother of 4.
Yeah.
And then we have the young man here in Kansas City, Ralph Yarble. He is still healing. He's with his family. Recently participated in a march for brain trauma because and people make the assumption because he is functioning that everything is 100%, and it's not. And let's don't even go for the emotional part of it. Excuse me. When people think in terms of him wanting to go somewhere to visit and not knowing the uncertainty of how people are going to respond.
Correct.
It's a very frightening thing.
Very frightening.
Life.
Wow. Wow. Dr. Wallace, I think we have a tremendous guest backstage with us.
Yes,
please.
an awesome sister. Dr. Kimberly Russaw is Associate Professor of Old Testament. She is a member of the Society of Biblical Literature, where she serves as the chair of the African American Biblical Hermeneutics Program Unit. She is also an editorial board member of the Journal of Biblical Literature. Her other professional memberships include the Academy, the American Academy of Religion, the society. Let's see. I'm sorry, guys. The National Black MBA Association. Her many publications include Revisiting. We have another look at the woman of Jericho, Daughters in Hebrew Bible, and Undaunted Readings, Miriam for the Sisters They Tried to Erase. My God.
Yes,
Wow.
Dr. Russaw has lectures
bad girl.
are presented at events such as PBS, Bible and Religions of the Ancient Near East, the Association of Theological Schools, and the Society of Biblical Literature. And she was my professor at Union Presbyterian Seminary when she did a womanist hermeneutic, a womanist biblical interpretation. She is remembered as that ain't right, because she's not remembered as no prostitute. Well, she's talking about Rahab. I'm sorry.
Rahab was remembered as a prostitute.
I'm sorry. I couldn't get. I just got messed
Rahab.
up. Let me introduce my scholar. How about that? Let me do it that way. An Alpha Kappa Alpha woman from the ITC and Vanderbilt University, Dr. Kimberly Russaw. We're so happy to have you. Forgive
You
me
were doing
for
just
making
fine.
all them blunders.
Thank you so much for that varied introduction, Sora. I'm tickled pink and gorgeous and green.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
We have a bad connection.
You is kind. You is important.
We have a bad connection.
We bless you, Dr. Kimberly. We're so glad and so happy that you are here with us.
Thank you so much.
I couldn't wait. I know our first opportunity was here in June, but my experience with you with UPS Sim was just marvelous and had me taking another class, Black Women in Mental Health as Resistance. I can't take the next two classes, but come January, I'll be back on the road.
Sounds good. That Kate Buchanan Women's Center is doing big things. So I'm glad that I was
Yeah, they're doing great.
able to accept the invitation to facilitate the course on women's biblical interpretation and got an opportunity to learn alongside great people like yourself.
Blessing, blessing. So most times I ask the first question, how are we doing in these COVID streets? However, now that they have said that we no longer have a pandemic, even though some people are still having trouble with COVID, how have you been doing since COVID? How about that?
I have been masked because I don't know these people. And I have trouble doing some contact tracing if I don't know all these people. So I decide to not only protect others, but protect myself, protect my vibranium with my mask when I do travel. And the good thing is, now that we're at the end of the semester, my time is a little bit more my own, in that I'm not having to be going back and forth to be with the people. I get my groceries delivered. If I could get my gas delivered for the car, I do that too. So I'm putting America to work because I make use of the conveniences that COVID brought us.
Yes. And the best thing is this Wi-Fi and us online providing. I think we started right during the first part of the pandemic to just bring a voice, and it's been a great opportunity for us. We got some questions here, and I'm going to ask Dr. Bradford, your AME sister, to read some of these.
Yes,
how about that?
Yes, ma'am.
Even though she's not an AKA, she is an AME. We'll let her have that.
Well,
Bradford, I apologize for not muting fast enough.
If there's anything to be said, Dr. Chalice, I've been AME longer than I've been AKA.
There you go, baby. That gives me some consolation right there. Because I felt like I was frozen.
She's from the one that came after us. In fact, all of them came after us.
I'm very familiar. This is good stuff, though. We all work together. How about that? One body, many members. If I can dip into that.
I love that. If I would venture to say, we all started together. So I love your book, Revisiting Rahab. And as the four of us were going through what we would ask, we came up with some questions that would spark some great dialogue, right? And one was why Zonah? Mm-hmm. Explain the Hebrew meaning or the Hebrew text of Zonah.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So let me start with your first question, which is the why. Why spend a whole chapter, really, of the book on this one Hebrew term? In most biblical narratives, the writers share information about the important characters that are pertinent to the text. Right. So we learn Jephthah only has one kid, and it's just this daughter. That's going to be important for the story. We learn that David is the youngest of his family, but he's good looking. That's going to be important for the story. When the biblical writer or writers introduce this woman in Joshua 2, they're careful to say that, or to mark her as a Zonah. Mm-hmm. Zonah is translated, if you go to the BDB, which is the most commonly used Hebrew lexicon or dictionary, you'll find that it usually gets translated in our English text as prostitute, harlot, or whore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it interesting that though she's introduced as that, there's no sexual exchange that takes place in the text. And so as a biblical scholar, I know that these designations are supposed to be important for some reason. Otherwise, they just say, actually, the writer would probably just say, ended up in George's house, right? Because we already have issues.
Wait, Dr. Russaw, you went by that too fast. You said there was no sexual
activity. There was no encounters.
There's no sexual exchange, no commodification.
Wow. In the text.
Correct.
And all these years, we've just been using the same narrative that we've heard over the years.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
My God, today.
Yeah. The other reason why I spent the time to dig around with this term is because in all of my, I'm a church kid. So in all of my time, all of my encounters with Rahab, it's Rahab, the prostitute.
Yes.
The sermons make a big deal out of Rahab was a, God can use a prostitute. God can use anybody.
Exactly.
But then when you read the text for yourself and you read it closely, or at least when I do, I have to say, well, wait a minute, there's no sex work going on here. Now, what we do know is that the biblical writers know how to talk about sex.
Oh yeah.
Right. There are a couple, we have examples throughout the canon where that evidence they know how to talk about sex. One way they talk about sex is they lay down and the next thing you know, Susie's pregnant.
Right.
Especially at somebody's feet.
He went into her.
Played with her, knew her, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether she wanted him to or not.
Pregnancy, the most obvious evidence for sexual encounter. There's none of that in Rahab's story. There's no exchange of money or favor, right?
Yeah.
There's none of that.
None of that.
In return for sex, Rahab does not get shekels, sheep, an upgrade in her living condition, anything like that. So, I became very suspicious of this use of Zonah. So that took me down the road, and so I did all of that work in one of those chapters. And so I've come to define Zonah as a female member of the Israelite society who is held in contempt by the community because of their engagement in sex work. And it's a female, it's always a female engaged in sex work. The problem here, because sex work, which threatens the idea that males alone control the female bodies.
Ooh. Ouch.
That pushes back.
No, wait, no. We just need to let that sit.
Rewind.
Wait a minute. If I was in the church, I said the organ need to play right there. Okay. All right. Okay.
No, we need to send this definition to the Supreme Court. That's what we need.
Well, and I want to be clear. I'm defining Zonah, and I'm also saying that in this story, Rahab is not acting as a Zonah. But this is what
yes. Okay, go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm sorry. Oh, wait a minute. One of our viewers asked you to repeat that again. They missed it. So help them.
I defined Zonah, but I want to be clear that in this story, Rahab is not acting as a Zonah.
Hallelujah.
Woo! Glory.
But I think
I need to go get my scarf. I need to wave some. Good God. Then go ahead. I'm sorry, Doctor.
Not the question that you asked me, but that understanding prompts a new question.
Yeah.
So then the question has to be, then why is she marked as a Zonah?
Please answer it.
I think she's marked as a Zonah for at least 2 reasons. The primary reason is a Zonah, because of their connection to sex work, would have been almost diametrical opposition to the ideal Israelite woman. Right? So she is the exact opposite of what the Israelites would have held up as good, right, and just. And so now we can say the God of the Israelites is so big, bad, gracious, and bigger, badder, deafer than all of these other gods, because this God even accepts the one that's the furthest away from what we consider ideal. Therefore, if God can work with a Rahab, if God can work with a Zonah, God can work with anyone.
Wait.
That could be an overarching motive for the biblical writer.
If that didn't open the eyes.
Which explains why she shows up in the New Testament.
Yes.
In the lineage of our Savior.
Go ahead.
Even before we get to our Christian Savior, she shows up in the lineage of King David, who's the big dog in the Old Testament.
Right. You're right.
Now wait.
But so we're gonna ask you to say that one more time.
By marking her as a Zonah or a prostitute, the biblical writers then get to make the claim that the God of the Israelites is so compelling, so grand, so big, so gracious, so magnanimous, and to follow this God is so compelling that even the person who's furthest away from acceptable would align with this God, would follow this God. And this God and this God's people would accept the one on the margin.
That's a great segue to our next question.
Okay.
You compare Rahab's encounter to the Epic of Gilgamesh. Could you explain the importance between the two? And you kind of alluded to it just now. So if you could further explain or the difference between the two or the importance between the two.
Sure. So just to give a bit of background, because I'm not clear on how well versed your viewers are in ancient Near Eastern literature, but one of the more famous and more popular narratives or stories told by the people who would have lived in ancient Sumer, ancient Babylon, and so forth, is the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This story, and much of the ancient Near Eastern literature, is important to us as biblical scholars because the Israelite material or the literature of ancient Israel comes out of that same cultural dynamic. So it's almost like saying, I'm from Chicago. So it's almost like saying stories told in Chicago, they sound a whole lot like stories told in Detroit. They sound a whole lot like, they step in Chicago, but they move the same way, but they call it something different in Detroit.
Me too.
The ancient Near Eastern stuff is older than the ancient Israelite stuff. So in many ways, what we see in our Bible sometimes are echoes. When I talk about this with my students, I say we're dealing with echoes of the ancient Near Eastern stuff. So every culture has a creation story. How did we get here? Much of what we see in Genesis 1 and 2 are echoes of some ancient Near Eastern literature that would have been floating around or in the air now I'm all off on the tangent, while the Israelites are in exile in Babylon. So the old stories of old Babylon are being told over and over again. These ancient Israelites are hearing it when they are no longer in exile. They come back and they're asking the question, how did we get here and how do we make sure this don't happen to us again, right? How do we come to this place? Let's tell our creation story. And it's not surprising that we see some of the same themes, some of the same motifs showing up in Gen 1 and 2 as we see in the Numa Elish or as we see in Atrahasis. So the story of Gilgamesh is often aligned with the story of Noah's Ark. Because at some point, there's a story that a flood comes. And one guy is set apart and he is not consumed by the flood.
Yeah.
Long story short, Gilgamesh goes on a journey with his friend. He and his friend want to do hood rat things. So they go on this journey and he wants to eventually meet the immortal god Utnapishtim, who has survived the flood. On his way, he stops at a tavern. The tavern is owned by a woman. The woman's name is Suduri. Saduri not only provides him with hospitality, but she also provides him with direction that helps him get to where he's. So she's wise. This is a wise character who helps him get to where he's supposed to go next. In the same way, I see that same sort of thing happening in this story of two spies from Israel who come to a new place, and they go to this lady's spot, and this lady, in this instance, her name is Rahab, not only provides them with hospitality, but gives them some direction, some wisdom. This sister actually negotiates, well, she's playing a long game, but the same sort of thing is happening. So we have this motif of women in this innkeeper, tavern keeper type of role in these different stories. So that's the connection I saw. I hope that answers your question.
Oh,
and they are business women too. I think in some translations say that they owned their property. Dr. Burns and I had a conversation about Rahab one time, and she made sure that she and her whole family were saved. So I said, okay, Burns, you my family, so you're gonna be saved too. So if that's not a womanist interpretation, all the way back to Rahab, I don't know what it is.
I'm gonna push that a little bit further. If I remember correctly, and I'm sure somebody has opened Joshua 2 and they reading the text with me. I think the text says that it's gonna be her mother, her father, her brothers, her sisters. There's no mention of a husband.
Yeah.
All that belonged to them.
Yeah.
So it's not just the family.
Yeah.
But if it's anybody, so it's the workers who belong to Brother Joe has a patch of land and he employs 5 different families. And I argue, I have a lecture and I talk about if we understand that what we've got going on here with this house is that Rahab is running a tavern, a way station, an inn, or whatever. And let's just say she's a businesswoman. You don't bother me, I'm not going to bother you. If some women want to rent out rooms on an hourly rate, as long as we don't have no problems, Rahab said, okay, Trixie, have at it. But you owe me, 3 shekels at the end of the night. I don't care if you made 15 or if you made 4. You just give me my 3 and we ain't gonna have no problem. Yeah. That would have been, so the spies say, everybody who's under your roof when we come back, we're gonna spare. It's reasonable to me that the people who worked for Rahab would have been under her roof. That her family and everybody who was with her family could have been under her roof. So now I'm thinking about how much of the community, not just the people she could name probably, but how much of the community. Now that's very womanist concern for the whole community. And if we say that she's concerned for Trixie, make sure that Trixie and Cherry Wine and whatever the other girls' names were are there, then she's also making sure that the least of these as well.
Yeah. I just and thank you for that, Dr. Russaw, because I found that and Dr. Wallace, hard to believe it's almost a year ago that when we had this initial conversation around, might be a little bit more than that, but the text stating that to me then validates that what it did for me was that it validated the mischaracterization of Rahab, for her to have that kind of influence, right? And that even for others to come then, that when they came to search, they took her word for it. These men aren't here, that they took her word for it. Yeah. And so in hearing that and looking at that text and how Rahab in what I want to call in English terms has been reduced to an understanding of a prostitute, and in doing that you strip her of how she was apparently respected, how her word was taken, and how she had an understanding for her entire community. So just thank you for that. We have one of our guests, Natasha Robinson, who says, as a professor, how do you handle hearing mistruths, eisegeting of text by church leaders, pastors, and preachers who consistently teach what you're teaching us is untrue? How do we get the real biblical interpretation from the classrooms to the pulpits and Sunday school lessons?
Yeah, good question.
So the first thing I want to do is say, hey, Natasha. The second thing is I'm gonna nuance your language, and I'm really concerned about that word real interpretation. What I'm most concerned with is responsible interpretation.
I like that.
I have done my work when my students are engaging the text responsibly. Full stop. Because different people see different things, right? Hans Georg Gadamer, the German philosopher, talks about interpretation as fusion of horizons, that it's a fusion of horizons when you bring all of that you are and all of your history, all of your baggage to the horizon, but the text brings all of itself and all of its baggage and all of its history. And when those two meet, that's when meaning is made. And so, for instance, so in my book, I talk about there was a study done with a group of former either sex worker or sex worker allies in California who read different passages from the Bible and just had Bible study. And one of the key takeaways from that, lo and behold, they read Rahab's story. And their understanding of what Rahab is doing in that text is very different than what Mother Jones understands. But that's not to say that those ladies understands is not cannot be. They were doing responsible readings of the text. Responsible readings of text. So Natasha, what do I do when folk come up to me with some foolishness that, because I think that's where you're going. Depending upon the situation, because context always matters, I'm probably going to ask them to show me where that is. How are you understanding that? I try to move people with open-ended questions. Where did you? How do you understand that? Well, what have you considered? Well, what about? Well, how? Yeah. And usually they either get flustered and throw a Bible verse at me and leave and talk about she ain't got no Jesus, or
you ain't got no oil.
I ain't oily. Or they'll say, you know what, I have to think about that. I have to think, okay, that's a gracious exit. Or, you know what, I had not considered that. And that's fine with me, because that says that you came in thinking one way. Now, when you had an opportunity to sit with the text differently, you're open to considering other possibilities that might be, again, more responsible. And that responsible is important to me because I don't want there to be violence done to the pews.
Yeah.
Done to the text from the pulpit. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is it's fluid.
Yeah.
And bringing my whole self to the text and engaging the text with my whole self. Yeah, that contextually, that makes sense, right? So, wow.
Because that's what we do. We don't say it. But people want to say, this is an objective reading of the text. No, there's never an objective reading. Even textual critics who are concerned with the words, phrasing, they're not fully objective. Because there's always something that's going on in them, or their mindset, their understanding of the text. We probably need to start with what do you think this Genesis through Revelation is?
Yeah.
The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
And we all bring our own experiences
before leaving Earth
and education, to the text. And I'm thankful that sometimes when people know better, they do better.
Absolutely. or at least they'll do different.
Different. I'll use that. Yeah, differently. So you talk about passing.
Yeah.
And in our African American context, passing, of course, means if you light enough, you're gonna be able to pass as white. So define passing in Rahab's context, and of course the now African American community.
Sure. So broadly defined, passing is simply the act of presenting as something that is not authentic to who you or what you are. Full stop. Passing has occurred for generations, so it shows up in different time periods, and more importantly, it shows up in different ethnic and cultural groups. African Americans are not the only ones who have this thing called passing going on. And African Americans in 2023 are not the only ones who, or during the Harlem Renaissance, are not the only ones who have this thing called passing going on. So, presenting as something that's not, it's authentically who you are. As I was reading Rahab's story, I should back up and say, I was an English major in undergrad. So the good people at Spelman College made sure we read a little bit of Nella Larson. And as I was reading Rahab and ruminating over Rahab, I said, wait, especially that encounter she has with the king's messengers. I said, wait a minute. She's passing. She's presenting as a loyal, fully committed member of the Canaanite Jericho community to these men. Meanwhile, she got these Israelite spies upstairs under some flaxseed or something. Hold on, she's presenting a different person to these men. She's passing, and that's when I saw that connection, I ran with it.
I mean, and that is amazing that you extrapolated that from the text and being able to identify.
Usually when passing, that phenomenon usually takes, there are a couple of things that mark passing. I can't remember them all, but they're in the book. But a couple. First of all, they're doing it either for some gain or to avoid some sort of bad thing happening. First thing. There's also this part of the element of the phenomenon where the person who is passing has made the decision to jettison or disconnect from their community. There's also an element of passing where there's a secretive element, right? That they're keeping a secret, and the folk who know who they really are, she has to trust that they're going to keep her secret, which to me gets to this whole bring all your family to the house. First question is, why ain't the family first of all, why do we have a woman not living under the household of a male? She either in this time period, she's either supposed to be living in her father's house or in her husband's house.
Come on.
The writer starts out and said they go to Rahab's house. So somehow or another, Rahab, and then we find out later in the story that her father and them are indeed somewhere else because they got to come to her house. So that part where she has distanced herself from her community. So I think about how many times did she go to get water at the well and she saw her cousin, and her cousin just looked at her and went,
right, sips tea.
Yeah. Or how perhaps there was a situation where in the early days, the little cousin didn't know, like, hey, Rahab, and the auntie is like, let's go. We don't know that lady.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're right that more than Rahab has done this thing called passing. The thing that comes to my mind is Ruth.
Yeah.
How she decides to pass and go into Boaz.
Well, now we're gonna have another conversation.
Listen.
It's only 4 chapters, but there's a whole lot.
Yes, there's a whole lot. And you really helped us in class to look at what were the characteristics and maybe and in some instances for her survival. And if we would think about it in our own communities, many of people that we say are women of the night are doing what they can do to feed their children.
That's what these women at that California Bible study were talking about. Absolutely. Now you got me on got me fired up here, Dr. Brenda, because I also want to talk about the character of. We've talked about the characterization of Rahab, but we need to talk about some elements of Rahab's character. In that, during this time, there weren't that many let's just look at it within the biblical text, the canon. How often do you see women having conversations? First, women speak and have direct conversation with males.
Not many.
In Rahab's story, not only does she have direct conversation with males, but she has direct conversation with males who represent power and authority.
Come on.
If those king's messengers had suspected or found out that she was lying, she probably would have died on this. Nobody cares about her. She ain't got no people around here, so we just gonna slit her from going about our business, because that's treason.
Right.
So she's passing in order to, because it's a life or death situation, right? Then she turns around and she passes with the Israelite spies. I know your God is the one. Your God has done all of this stuff up and through here. And you know what? When we heard y'all were coming, woo, we fainted with fear. We were overwhelmed. Woo, look at here now. Since I've been kind to you.
Smooth.
Why don't you hook a sister up?
That's it. Hook a sister.
That way. If you go that way, you ought to be able to catch them. Y'all need to go this way.
Yeah.
3 days. Give them about 3 days. You ought to be able to come down out of the mountains and go on about your business. Yeah.
That alone.
Dr. Russaw.
Influence.
Dr. Russaw, we have one of our viewers who asked this question. So if you're reading the text and it says Rahab was a prostitute, unless that person has done the in-depth studies you have, is the person misquoting the text?
No, the person is not misquoting the text, because the word zonah is in the Hebrew. It's in the text. It's in the text. My question is, why is it in the text? Yeah. They're not misquoting. It is in the text.
Wow. That's a great question, Reverend.
I think in our study and in our teaching, we need to bring a different voice or a different perspective on what zonah and who zonah is. Oftentimes they are, and I love the Catholic Jerome commentary, which often says things that are not necessarily in our traditional commentaries. It says that it said that Rahab was a business woman. Man, that was fulfilling. It was enlightening, and it's just a different. And we all bring our own interpretation to the text. We bring our own histories to the text. We bring our own experiences to the text. So that's why I hear you saying that no one can say this is the authentic or this is the only way to look at this text, which is a blessing, I think, in itself.
I think that, thank you for that. To push that a little bit further, though, I think where we're going is it's important to also read the scholarship.
Yeah.
Because folk let's play it like this. Chalice ain't got time to go run around in the BDB and then pull out that halot and then do a word study. But she could buy my book.
And you better know I will. I have. It's in there.
So even with this zonah treatment, I'm thinking about the Dr. Randall Bailey, African American Biblical Hermeneutic, has an article called "They're Nothing But Incestuous Bastards." I usually try to assign it. I like to halfway curse in my class, and if I'm on the syllabus, I can do it. But then it makes the claim that oftentimes when a one group is trying to minimize another group, they're going to do a couple of things. They're going to over-sexualize them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to try to get rid of their library, where they keep their intelligence.
Oh, God Almighty.
And then I can't remember the other two things. So that's what's to mark Rahab as a Zonah. This could be an example of that first move that the Israelite writer is trying to make. Also, Dr. Renita Weems in her Battered Love.
Battered Love.
Yes.
Metaphors used in the prophets. And one of the ones that is very popular is this use of the sexualization of the woman as a stand-in for how God is going to treat nations who are unfaithful. Going to throw your sword up. You will be. You are acting like a Zonah. So Zonah actually shows up in all three portions of the Hebrew canon: the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the law, the prophets, and the writings. That tells me that word was popular for the Israelites over a broad swath of time, because these three different sections are written at different times in the life of the Israelites. So Bailey is talking about it in one way, the sexualization in one way. Weems is talking about it in another. You're not going to get that if all you do is read the NIV.
Yeah. Ooh. Shots fired. Shots fired.
Oh, hallelujah. Not more than just one biblical writing or biblical interpretation. And I hate to do this shameless plug of Logos, but Logos can give you some of that history that if you don't have time, like Dr. Chalice, to do in-depth exegesis, you can find that the scholarship is there. Now, some of that stuff is dated.
Have gone to seminary. You know how to use the resources.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, ladies, we have about 5 minutes left in our time. I do want us to get to this last question that we have.
You got to get
to this one where you speak about women as the POWs.
Yeah.
We 5 minutes is not going to do justice to this, but we want to hear about it from the text of Rahab and us here now.
Yeah. So in Genesis, in Joshua 6, at the end of the, we like to call it the conquest story, but it's war. At the end of the war that results in the destruction of Jericho, we find the part where Rahab's people are standing on the outside of town, looking back over at the destruction of their hometown, and the text says something like, "And Rahab and her people were made to be outside of the Israelite camp for 7 days," or whatever the prescribed period of time was, and then they've been amongst the Israelites until this very day. That felt very happily ever after to me.
Okay.
And just the human in me was very suspicious of. So let me get this straight. You came to town, burned the whole thing down, and I live happily ever after with y'all.
No.
That don't even seem like a good idea.
No.
Then further in the canon, we find out that this Israelite guy named Salmon has a baby by a woman named Rahab. That baby turns down into the lineage of King David. Now, when I was suspicious of that happily ever after, first of all, I think that our use of the term conquest, the conquest of Jericho, is too soft.
Ooh.
It's too soft. There was no conquest. It was a massacre. They went there and took over those people's very lives and livelihood. And to use terms like conquest, to me, makes it too romantic. It distances us too far from the brutality that was going on there.
America.
It used to be a massacre as part of a war campaign, because we learned earlier that the Israelites are moving through this area, taking out Rahab told him, we know what you did with Og and Sihon and all them other jokers. So we scared of y'all. Mm-hmm. So that made me say, well, wait a minute. How does war work in the ancient world? Mm-hmm. And so I did the research because Chalice didn't have time to do it. Learned about, you hear people talk about the spoils of war. Yeah. We see it in the biblical text when we're going to do a census and we're going to give land to the households that we just conquered. Mm-hmm. We're going to divvy it up and give it to people. Mm-hmm. Or we see in the text, go in there and you can take all the bronze and you can take all the gold, but just don't take anything from the altar.
Right.
So the physical materials. But what about the people who are left standing? Mm-hmm. So I realized that what I learned is that during this period, it's usually the women and the children who remain. Mm. So they would have been taken as what we would call prisoners of war. They were usually forced into some sort of labor, mm-hmm. especially with the children. Mm-hmm. And the women, if they were attached to a man, they treated the two groups of women differently. But most often, it's reasonable to assume that there was some sort of sexual, unwelcome sexual encounter with the women who were left as prisoners of war. So when I read that text that says Salmon and Rahab had a baby, I'll go, yeah, so I'm not so sure that you're going to tell me that Salmon actually fell in love with, married, and they had a whole family. Notice there's only one mention of one kid that comes out of this encounter.
That right there.
And what we have here is that Rahab, as a Canaanite now living amongst the Israelites, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. was sexually assaulted by a dude named Salmon. And out of that encounter, there's a son born, and in that lineage, he's going to be an Israelite because of his daddy. We're going to count him as an Israelite, because of his daddy. And out of that eventually works its way down to King David, and then further down to Jesus Christ. But yeah, I think what we have here, if we peel back the onion and say, well, in context, how are people handled in war, then that's what's happening, the prison war situation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Russaw. You have enlightened us. Yeah, you have made us think. Mm-hmm. You have forced us to go look at the text from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And we are ever so grateful for your time with us. And we definitely, we're going to ask our audience, like we normally do, to put the likes, the shares, and the loves, and to say, yes, Dr. Russaw needs to come back, because she got to finish that Rahab book. We just got the first part, a little bit of the first part.
You mentioned Ruth. I hope to finish this summer. I'm working on an essay dealing with Ruth and violence. So when we come back again, we can talk about Ruth as well.
Oh, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Russaw. Hang around backstage with us, if you would, please.
Thank you.
Woo. Wow, ladies, another powerful, absolutely powerful time. Thank you, viewing audience. Put it in the chat if you enjoyed this conversation, if it pricked your mind, pricked your thinking. And on next week, we will have with us none other than Dr. Merritt Seymour, who will be talking about his newest book, Starting Over Again. Thank you all so very much for being with us. See you next week, same time. God bless.
Same place.
Love you.